It was 4 o'clock in the morning when I woke to the faint sound of gravel crunching beneath cautious footsteps. At first, I thought it was the restless wind brushing against the pines outside the cabin, but when I peered through the window, my heart nearly stopped. There, in the dim silver glow of the early dawn, stood my daughter Linda and her husband, Derek. They were crouched in the empty lot beside my cabin, their hands busily digging at the earth. I pressed my palm to the glass, my breath fogging the cold surface. In their hands, they held a small metal box. I couldn't see what was inside, but the way they looked over their shoulders, whispering in the shadows, told me it was something they didn't want me to know. After they covered the dirt and hurried away, I slipped on my robe and stepped into the chilly mountain air. The soil was still soft, disturbed. My fingers trembled as I clawed it open. When the metal box scraped against my nails, I yanked it free and opened it under the weak porch light. What I saw made my knees buckle. The scream tore out of me before I could stop it. But that was only the beginning. I still remember with piercing clarity the emptiness that swallowed me after Richard's funeral. He had been my husband for 38 years, a span of time that stretched across more than half of my life, and every day of it had been stitched together with memories that seemed unbreakable. When he passed away, the world itself seemed to collapse inside me. I lost not only the man I had shared a bed with, but also the confidant who had carried my worries and my joys, the partner who had walked beside me through decades of ordinary days that felt extraordinary only because he was there. My name is Marjorie. I am 62 years old, a silver-haired, slender woman who still carries the soft, patient habits of an elementary school teacher who retired years ago. I had always believed that I had weathered enough storms in my life, that the later chapters of my story would be quiet and peaceful, written against the backdrop of the cabin that Richard and I built together on the edge of a mountain lake in Colorado. I imagined long afternoons with books, mornings filled with birdsong, evenings of silence that carried the weight of tranquility. But life, in its cruel irony, had reserved a darker truth for me. The peace I thought I had earned was about to be stripped away, not by strangers, not by distant misfortune, but by the very people I once believed were my safe harbor. After the funeral, the house changed. The air inside grew heavier. The dining table, where 2 chairs had always been occupied, now felt unbearably empty, with only one seat filled. In the late afternoons, when the sun stretched across the weathered wooden porch, the silence settled in like a thick blanket I could not push away. I no longer heard Richard's familiar footsteps creaking against the planks, no longer caught him sneaking into the pantry for the cookies he always claimed he would quit eating, no longer felt the echo of his laughter as he told a story for the 10th time, refusing to admit he had already told it. Everything around me grew so silent that even the wind brushing through the tall pines outside felt like a reminder that I was utterly alone. It was during those hollow days that Linda arrived, my only daughter. She was 42 years old, and she carried herself with the sharp assurance of a woman who had long ago learned how to win arguments in courtrooms. Linda was a corporate lawyer, always dressed in crisp suits, her voice deliberate and steady, as though every sentence had been rehearsed before a jury. With her came Derek, her husband. Derek was polished in a different way, a sleek investment advisor whose smile seemed glued in place, as though he wanted the world to believe he had every answer tucked neatly in his pocket. Linda told me, "Mom, don't worry about anything. We'll handle all the estate paperwork. You just need to rest." Those words wrapped around my grieving heart like a blanket. I wanted so badly to believe that my daughter was stepping in because she loved me, because she understood how broken I felt. Derek echoed her promises with gestures that seemed thoughtful. He asked about my health, brought bottles of wine to lighten the mood, insisted that I didn't need to trouble myself with confusing documents, and because I was raw with loss, because I was clinging to the only family I had left, I accepted their words without hesitation. There was one moment that still lingers in my memory, like a bruise that never fades. Linda looked at me with her lawyer's eyes, eyes that rarely softened, and said, "Mom, you're old now. Just let us take care of it. Don't trouble yourself with complicated things." Her tone was not cruel, but firm, a voice she might have used to instruct a client to follow advice without questions. The word old cut me in a way I could not admit out loud. For a second, my pride flinched, but then I reminded myself that she was speaking from concern, that she wanted to protect me. So I stayed silent. And in my silence, I surrendered. I signed documents without reading them. I let Derek explain accounts I did not fully understand. I handed over keys, folders, and envelopes, trusting that my daughter and her husband would do what was best. Why wouldn't I? Linda was the little girl I had rocked to sleep in a cabin not far from where we stood now. Derek was the man she had chosen to share her life with, and I had welcomed him into our family with open arms. Suspicion felt out of place in my grieving heart. The cabin by the lake had always been more than a building. It was a vessel for memories, a sanctuary Richard had worked on with his own two hands. He had bought the property back when Linda was still a child, spending long weekends hammering, painting, fixing, making sure every corner carried his touch. I still remember the day he turned to me with a glimmer in his eyes and said, "This will be the place where we grow old together, Marjorie." And I had believed him. For decades, that promise came true. Summers saw Linda splashing along the shoreline. Winters brought Richard's fires that crackled against the frost. Autumn afternoons were filled with laughter and card games by the window. The walls had soaked in our lives, and to me, the cabin was not property, it was family, history, love carved into timber. That was why, when Linda and Derek told me they would manage the estate, I handed over the papers with no hesitation. I believed, with every fiber of my being, that they would safeguard what Richard and I had built. I did not open filing cabinets to double-check deeds. I did not look at the bank balances Richard and I had once reviewed together at the kitchen table. I simply trusted. Trust is a dangerous thing when placed in the wrong hands, though I did not yet know that. Some afternoons I sat by the window, staring at the shimmering surface of the lake, watching as Linda and Derek spoke in hushed tones outside. Their heads bent close together, their voices carried by the wind in snippets I could not decipher. I thought nothing of it. I believed they were discussing work, perhaps investments, perhaps one of Linda's cases. I dismissed the flicker of unease that stirred in me when their eyes glanced back toward the cabin with something I could not name. I told myself not to be paranoid, not to create problems where none existed. But looking back now, I realized that the signs had always been there. Their calculated silences, the way Linda avoided explaining certain documents in detail, the way Derek's reassuring smile never reached his eyes. The shadows in their movements were visible, but I refused to look at them. It all seemed harmless until that early morning when I peered through my window and saw them burying the small metal box in the dark. That moment was the fracture in the illusion, the first rip in the fabric of trust I had wrapped around myself. The morning after I unearthed that box, the world outside looked deceptively ordinary. The autumn air was crisp, the lake shimmered with its usual calm, and the cabin's wooden walls glowed with the faint amber light of sunrise. Yet inside me, everything had shifted. I sat at the kitchen table with the box open before me, its contents scattered like pieces of a puzzle I did not want to solve. My anniversary ring, Richard had given it to me on our 25th wedding anniversary, slipping it onto my finger with a smile that still warmed me in memory. Beside it lay my mother's pearl necklace, the one Richard had tracked down and bought back from a pawn shop when money was tight in our early years, because he knew how much it meant to me. And then there were the property deeds, the original documents to the cabin and the lot beside it. I stared at those papers, my breath caught in my throat. This was not some forgotten keepsake box, not something accidentally misplaced. This was deliberate. They had buried the heart of my life, the proof of everything Richard and I had built, as though it were a secret to be hidden away. I felt my body tremble, not from the morning chill, but from the storm of disbelief and betrayal rising inside me. Why? Why would Linda, my own daughter, do this? When I confronted her later that day, her eyes did not flicker with shame. Instead, she sighed with the patience of a lawyer explaining something to a client too simple to understand. "Mom," she said, "everything belongs to the estate now. It's not yours anymore." Her tone was clipped, factual, almost dismissive. I could barely believe what I was hearing. My lips parted, but no words came out at first. My ring, my necklace, my deeds all swept under the broad, impersonal word estate. I managed to whisper, "But Richard left these to me. He wanted me to have them. This cabin, this land, it's mine, Linda. You know that." Her eyes sharpened. "No, Mom, that's not how it works. Legally, this is all part of the estate. Derek and I are handling it, and you need to trust us." Trust. That word cut me deeper than any blade. I had given them my trust so freely, believing their reassurances, letting them carry the weight I thought was too heavy for me. And now I realized that very trust was the rope tightening around my neck. I tried to protest, but Linda's voice grew harder. "Mom, you're not thinking clearly. You're too emotional. This isn't about memories. It's about what's legal. And you're not in a position to manage all this." Her words stung in ways I cannot fully describe. Emotional? Yes, I was emotional. I had just buried my husband. But incompetent? Unable to manage my own affairs? The implication wrapped around me like a suffocating fog. My own daughter was not only dismissing my feelings, she was erasing my agency. The days that followed were a blur of unease. I noticed more whispers, more private conversations between Linda and Derek. I caught glimpses of documents tucked away, of calls they took in hushed voices when they thought I wasn't listening. The tension inside me coiled tighter with every passing day. Then came the breaking point. One morning, I overheard Derek on the phone in the living room. His voice was low but urgent. "Yes, the property will be listed next week," he said. My blood ran cold. Listed? The cabin? The thought was unthinkable. This was the home Richard and I had promised to grow old in, the sanctuary of our family, and they were planning to sell it without even asking me. I confronted them again, but this time Derek chimed in, his smooth voice coated with false calm. "Marjorie, you don't need to worry about these things. The market is good right now, and it's the best time to sell. It's all for your benefit, for my benefit." The words were a slap. My benefit did not involve erasing my memories, tearing down the walls Richard had built with his own hands. I tried to stand my ground, but Linda's eyes narrowed, and she said in that lawyer's voice of hers, "Mom, if you keep interfering, you're going to make things worse for yourself." It was then that I decided to check the accounts, something I had avoided for weeks. What I discovered made me gasp so loudly, I had to cover my own mouth. More than $300,000 money Richard and I had saved over decades of careful living was gone, vanished. I stared at the numbers on the statement, my heart pounding so violently I thought I might collapse. When I demanded an explanation, Linda's tone turned crueler than I had ever heard it. "Mom, stop this paranoia. You can't keep track of finances anymore. That's why we're helping you. You're just too old to manage it." Her words crushed me, but they also ignited something inside me. For months, grief had wrapped me in a haze, making me passive, pliant, too weary to resist. But hearing my daughter dismiss me, gaslight me, reduce me to a helpless old woman, it tore through that fog. Beneath the grief, there was rage. A sharp, clean rage that gave me clarity. They had not only taken my husband's memory and twisted it into a legal excuse. They had stolen money, plotted to sell my home, and tried to bury the physical symbols of my life in a box under the dirt, and now they wanted to convince me I was too weak, too incompetent to fight back. But they had underestimated me. I sat alone that evening, the mountain air crisp outside, the lake glimmering with the last colors of sunset. In my hands, I held the ring, the necklace, and the deeds. They were not just objects, they were proof. Proof of my husband's love, proof of my family's history, proof of my rights. And I swore to myself, with a fierceness I had not felt in months, that I would not let them take it all from me. The days after I discovered the missing money were drenched in a haze of disbelief. I would wake in the cabin, listen to the wind sweep across the lake, and for a fleeting second imagine that everything was still as it had been when Richard was alive. But the illusion shattered each time I remembered the truth. Linda and Derek had already crossed a line that no daughter, no son-in-law should ever cross. They were not simply careless with my trust. They were dismantling the life Richard and I had spent nearly 4 decades building. I tried to confront them again, hoping that perhaps some shred of guilt would surface in their eyes, some flicker of the love I had once believed unshakable. But when I asked about the missing $300,000, Linda folded her arms and spoke with a measured coldness that made my blood run cold. "Mom, you're imagining things. That money was invested. It's for your future. You need to stop obsessing over numbers you don't understand." Her words were sharp, rehearsed, like a script she had perfected long before I asked the question. Derek, sitting beside her in his polished loafers, chimed in smoothly. "You'll thank us later, Marjorie. You just need to trust the process. We know what we're doing." The condescension in his voice made my stomach churn. This man, who had entered my family by marriage, now spoke to me as if I were a child who had misplaced her homework. And my daughter, my own flesh and blood, stood beside him, validating every insult, every attempt to strip me of my authority. The tension grew heavier with each passing day. One afternoon, I overheard Linda in the cabin's den, speaking on the phone. "Yes, the second mortgage went through," she whispered. "We'll use the equity to cover the investments. She won't know the difference." My heart stopped. A second mortgage? Without my knowledge, without my consent, they had shackled the very roof over my head with debt. I confronted her immediately, unable to contain the fury shaking through my body. "Linda, how dare you? This is my home, your father's home. How could you put it at risk without even asking me?" Linda's eyes narrowed, and her voice turned to ice. "Mom, stop acting like you have any control here. You're not capable of handling finances anymore. You've been irrational since Dad died. Derek and I are protecting you from yourself." The words struck like a knife. Irrational, incapable, protecting me from myself. They were rewriting my grief as incompetence, twisting my mourning into an excuse to seize power. The betrayal tasted bitter in my mouth, and for the first time, I felt something stronger than sorrow resolve. That night, I sat by the fire alone, the documents I had pulled from the buried box spread across the coffee table. The flames crackled as though urging me to move, to act, to stop surrendering. I stared at Richard's handwriting on the deed, the familiar swoop of his signature, and I could almost hear his voice. "Marjorie, you have more strength than you think." The next morning, I dressed carefully, not in my usual cardigan and soft shoes, but in a pressed blouse and the leather boots Richard had once bought me for hiking. I looked at myself in the mirror, silver hair pinned back, eyes steadier than they had been in months. The woman staring back at me was no longer the widow curled in grief. She was a wife defending her husband's legacy, a mother reclaiming her dignity. I drove into town and visited the local bank. My hands trembled as I handed over my identification and asked about the joint accounts Richard and I had shared. The banker looked at me with hesitation, then printed the statements. As I scanned the pages, my breath caught again. Large withdrawals, transfers I had never authorized, Loans taken out under my name but signed by Linda with power of attorney documents I had not realized I had granted her. My vision blurred, but I forced myself to keep reading. They had siphoned away not just the savings, but the very foundation of my financial security. I left the bank with the papers clutched tightly in my hands, anger simmering beneath my skin like a fire I could no longer contain. On my way back, I drove past a real estate office and froze. There, in the window, was a flyer. My cabin photographed in golden sunlight, described as a charming lakeside retreat, perfect for seasonal buyers. My home, listed for sale, as if I were already gone from it. The betrayal crashed over me in waves so fierce I had to grip the steering wheel just to steady myself. My daughter had put a price tag on my life's sanctuary. She was selling not only the walls that had heard Richard's laughter, but the very ground where his ashes rested beneath the oak tree. The rage in me roared so loudly it drowned out every other thought. When I confronted them that evening, Derek smirked as if my fury amused him. "It's just business, Marjorie. You'll get a nice payout. You can find somewhere smaller, easier to manage. You'll be more comfortable," Linda added, her voice hard as stone. "Mom, stop fighting this. You're making it worse. We're handling it. You don't get a say anymore." I looked at them, then really looked. The daughter I had raised, the child I had cradled in my arms, now stood before me not as family but as a stranger, an adversary. Her husband's hand rested possessively on her shoulder, and together they were not here to care for me, but to erase me. That night, as I lay in bed, I could not sleep. The shadows on the ceiling seemed to whisper Richard's name, and I felt his absence more keenly than ever. Yet instead of paralyzing me, the grief hardened into something new. They thought I was weak, that I was old, that I would not fight back. They were wrong. I would not allow Richard's memory to be reduced to a transaction. I would not allow my life to be stolen piece by piece. For the first time since his death, I felt awake, alive, burning with a clarity that no amount of manipulation could dim. The battle had begun. The morning after my sleepless night, I sat with a mug of black coffee that had long since gone cold, staring at the stack of documents I had pulled together. The bank statements, the mortgage papers, the real estate listing, all of them screamed the truth I had tried so hard not to face. My daughter and her husband were not protecting me. They were stripping me bare, piece by piece, hoping I would stay quiet until nothing was left. But silence was no longer an option. I began to watch them differently. Every word, every glance, every phone call was a clue. When Linda spoke to me now, her tone carried the sharpness of someone used to controlling the narrative, and Derek's smile seemed more like a mask stretched too tightly over greed. I started keeping my own notes, jotting down dates and snippets of conversations, copying every piece of mail that came addressed to me but intercepted by Linda. It felt strange, almost clandestine, but I knew I was gathering more than paper. I was gathering power. The first major crack came at the law office. Linda had insisted I sign yet another set of papers to finalize estate matters. I walked in with my heart pounding, the folder of documents hidden in my bag. The receptionist gave me a polite smile as Linda ushered me into a conference room, Derek at her side, already tapping his pen against the polished table as if impatient for me to comply. "Mom, this is routine," Linda said smoothly, sliding the papers across to me. "Just sign and we can move forward." I stared down at the lines of legal jargon, but instead of reaching for the pen, I reached into my bag. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled out the bank statements, the mortgage contract, the real estate listing with my cabin's photograph on it. I spread them across the table, one by one, like laying out a deck of cards in a game I was finally ready to play. "Explain this," I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. Linda froze, her face draining of color for the briefest second before hardening again. Derek leaned forward, his voice dripping with false charm. "Marjorie, you don't understand how investments work. These are strategies." "Strategies?" My voice cut sharper than I intended. Selling my home without my knowledge? Mortgaging the cabin Richard built with his own hands? Stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars from accounts with my name on them, do you call that strategy? The room went silent, thick with the weight of exposed lies. Linda's hands trembled slightly as she tried to gather the papers back, but I placed my palm firmly on them, refusing to let her. For the first time, she looked less like my daughter and more like someone caught cornered, her lawyer's mask slipping, her voice turned cold, brittle. Mom, you are not capable of managing this. If you try to fight us, you'll only hurt yourself. Legally, you don't have a chance. It was Derek, though, who revealed the truth in his arrogance. She's bluffing, Linda. She doesn't have the guts or the resources. She's an old woman clinging to a house she can't even maintain. Let it go, Marjorie. Sign the papers and make it easy. Old woman. Helpless. The words echoed in my ears, but instead of breaking me, they lit a fire I hadn't felt in months. I gathered the documents back into my folder, rose to my feet, and looked at them both. You may think I am helpless, but you've forgotten something. Richard did not marry a weak woman, and I am not done fighting. I left the office with my knees trembling, but my spirit steady. Each step felt like reclaiming ground they had stolen from me. I drove back to the cabin, parked by the lake, and sat there for a long time. The mountains rose around me, solid and unshakable, and I thought of Richard, how he had built this place, how he had believed in me even in moments when I doubted myself. His faith became my strength. That evening, Linda and Derek came to the cabin unannounced. They carried folders, their faces drawn tight with the determination of people who knew the walls were closing in. Derek dropped the stack of contracts on the kitchen table. This is your last chance to cooperate, Marjorie. If you don't, we'll have you declared financially incompetent. The court will appoint us to manage your estate anyway. Save yourself the trouble. My hands shook as I poured tea into 3 cups, but when I spoke, my voice did not waver. No, Derek. The trouble is already here, and you brought it. Linda's eyes narrowed, but I caught the flicker of doubt behind them. She knew I had seen too much, uncovered too much. They could no longer bury their greed in legal words and whispered plans. That night, after they left, I sat by the fire once more, the flames dancing shadows across the walls. My grief was still there, grief for Richard, grief for the daughter I thought I knew, but it no longer controlled me. In its place was something fiercer, determination. They had underestimated me. They believed age and sorrow made me weak, but what they had really done was awaken a part of me I thought had died with Richard. The part that fought for what mattered most. And so I began to plan. I reached out quietly to neighbors I trusted, asked questions I had been too ashamed to ask before. Had they seen Linda and Derek at the bank, at the courthouse, at the real estate office? The stories trickled in, each one confirming what I already knew. My daughter and her husband had woven a web of deceit around me. But webs, no matter how cleverly spun, can be torn apart. For the first time since Richard's passing, I felt a sense of purpose. My fight was no longer only for myself. It was for him, for the love we had built, for the home that carried our history. And as I gathered strength, I knew this battle was only beginning. The sun was setting when Olivia knocked on my door. At first, I thought it was Linda again, returning to badger me with more contracts and threats, and my stomach tightened in dread. But when I opened the door, there she stood, Olivia, my neighbor from across the lake, holding a casserole dish covered in foil, her breath visible in the chilly air. Her eyes, soft and knowing, searched mine, and in that moment, I realized how desperately I needed kindness. I thought you could use a warm meal, she said simply, stepping inside without the guarded hesitation that had crept into every one of Linda's visits. She set the dish down on the counter, then looked at me with a gentleness that made the tears I had been holding back for days threaten to spill over. I tried to brush it off, to act as though I was fine. Oh, Olivia, you didn't have to. She cut me off softly. Marjorie, you don't have to pretend with me. I can see something is wrong. Her words cracked the dam I had been struggling to keep intact. I told her everything. The buried box, the missing money, the mortgage I never agreed to, the real estate listing that threatened to erase the home Richard had built. My voice trembled. My hands shook as I spoke. But Olivia didn't interrupt, didn't doubt me, didn't offer empty platitudes. She just listened, her eyes steady, her presence solid. When I finally fell silent, she reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Marjorie, you are not alone in this. What they're doing, it's wrong. And it's not just cruel. It's illegal. Illegal! The word echoed in my mind, foreign yet oddly comforting. I had been so lost in the haze of betrayal and grief that I hadn't even considered that what Linda and Derek were doing wasn't just immoral, but against the law. Olivia continued. I know someone who can help. Her name is Mary Hannity. She's an attorney who specializes in elder financial abuse. She helped a friend of mine when her nephew tried to take her house after her husband died. She's sharp, she's compassionate, and she doesn't let people get away with things like this. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt a glimmer of something I thought I had lost hope. The idea that there was someone out there who not only understood, but could fight back against Linda and Derek's schemes, lit a fire in me. The next day, Olivia drove me into town to meet Mary. Her office was in a modest brick building near the courthouse, the kind of place you could walk past without noticing. But when Mary greeted us, her handshake firm, her eyes keen, I knew immediately that she was not someone who could be overlooked. She invited me into her office, a room lined with shelves of thick law books and decorated with framed photographs of her family. It felt warm, safe, yet charged with purpose. Tell me everything, she said, pulling out a notepad. And I did. I laid it all out, the details I had scribbled down in my notebook late at night, the copies of bank statements, the photographs of the real estate listing. As I spoke, I watched her expression shift from concern to focus, her pen moving swiftly across the page. When I finished, she leaned back, her eyes narrowing with determination. Marjorie, what they've done is a textbook case of elder financial exploitation. Taking out a mortgage in your name without consent, draining your accounts, trying to sell your property behind your back that's not just unethical, it's criminal. The word criminal sent a shiver down my spine. I had been so consumed by the emotional weight of betrayal that I hadn't seen the legal framework forming around me. But Mary saw it clearly. You have more power than you realize, she continued. You still have the original deeds. You have documented proof of unauthorized transactions, and you have your testimony, which is credible and compelling. If we move quickly, we can file charges and stop the sale before it goes through. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The thought of taking legal action against my own daughter made my chest ache. The mother in me still wanted to believe Linda could be reasoned with, that some part of her could be salvaged from the greed that had consumed her. But then I remembered the way she had looked at me. Not as a mother, not even as a person, but as an obstacle. Mary seemed to sense my hesitation. Marjorie, I know this is painful, but love doesn't mean surrendering your rights. Protecting yourself doesn't mean you stop being her mother. It means you show her that you will not be erased. Her words struck deep. I realized then that this fight wasn't just about saving the cabin or recovering money. It was about reclaiming myself, about refusing to let grief and manipulation reduce me to a shadow of who I once was. Over the next week, Mary guided me step by step. We gathered evidence, drafted affidavits, and filed the necessary paperwork with the court. Olivia stood by me through it all, driving me to appointments, sitting beside me when the weight of it threatened to crush me. There were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how it had come to this, how the daughter I had once rocked to sleep could become the adversary I was preparing to face in court. But with each passing day, my resolve hardened. One afternoon, as I sorted through Richard's old desk for more documents, I came across a folder I had forgotten. Inside were mineral rights he had acquired years ago. A piece of land not far from the cabin that held untapped value. I had never thought much of it, but when Mary saw the papers, her eyes lit up. "Marjorie, do you realize what this means? These rights are worth at least $200,000, plus royalties if they're developed. It's more than just additional security, it's leverage." Leverage. The word rolled around in my mind like a stone gathering momentum. Suddenly, I had not only the proof of their crimes, but an asset they hadn't counted on, one that could turn the tide entirely. I felt Richard's presence in that moment, as though he were standing beside me, reminding me that he had always prepared, always thought ahead, always believed in my strength even when I doubted it myself. With Mary's guidance, we prepared for the confrontation I knew was coming. Linda and Derek would not back down easily. They would fight, manipulate, threaten. But I was no longer the grieving widow they thought they could silence. I was a woman armed with truth, with law, with the memory of a husband who had trusted me to carry on his legacy. And for the first time since Richard's death, I no longer felt alone. The morning of the confrontation arrived with a sky so sharp and blue, it almost hurt to look at. The air carried that early mountain bite, crisp and cold, as if the earth itself knew something momentous was about to unfold. I woke before dawn, unable to rest any longer, and dressed carefully, deliberately. I wanted to feel Richard's strength around me, so I put on the leather boots he had once given me for hiking, pulled back my silver hair, and buttoned the blouse that had always made me feel more put together. My reflection in the mirror did not look like a grieving widow anymore. It looked like a woman preparing for battle. Downstairs in the kitchen, I laid out the table like a soldier, placing weapons in neat formation. There was the original deed with Richard's signature etched across it, proof that this cabin and the land beside it belonged to me. Next came the bank statements. Pages of numbers that screamed the truth of what had been taken from me. Hundreds of thousands of dollars siphoned away behind my back. I added the mortgage documents, signed not by me, but by Linda, her handwriting a damning piece of evidence. And finally, I placed the folder of mineral rights Richard had tucked away years ago, rights worth over $200,000. I arranged them in a clean line across the wooden table where so many family meals had once been shared, where laughter used to echo. Today, it would hold confrontation instead of bread and wine. At exactly 10 o'clock, I heard tires crunching over the gravel outside. My heart pounded, steady but strong, as I stepped to the window. Linda emerged first, her black heels striking the ground with the certainty of someone who thought the law bent to her will. She carried a leather folder tucked under her arm, her face set in that cool mask of professionalism she wore in court. Derek followed, carrying a sleek briefcase and wearing that infuriating smirk, the one that always suggested he was 3 moves ahead of everyone else. They walked toward my door, not as family, but as predators approaching their prey. They entered without knocking, as if the cabin already belonged to them, as if I had already been erased. Derek dropped his briefcase on the table with a heavy thud, the sound reverberating through the kitchen like a warning shot. Linda sat down briskly, opening her folder, her eyes fixed on me with a lawyer's sharpness. "Mom," she began, her tone clipped and rehearsed. "We need to resolve this today. Here are the contracts. Sign them, and this will all be over." Her words cut deep. Over. As if the decades of love, labor, and memory Richard and I had poured into this place could be ended with a single stroke of my pen. I inhaled deeply, steadying myself, and gestured to the chairs across from me. "Sit," I said. My voice was calm, almost cold. They exchanged a quick glance, surprised perhaps at my tone, but obeyed. Instead of reaching for the papers Linda pushed across the table, I placed my hand firmly on the deeds, then slid them forward. "Before I sign anything, I think you should look at these." Linda frowned, irritation flashing across her face. "Mom, we don't have time for this." "Make time," I interrupted. My voice did not tremble. One by one, I laid the documents out before them. The deed with Richard's familiar signature. The bank statements showing missing funds, withdrawals I had never approved. The mortgage papers bearing Linda's handwriting instead of mine. And, at last, the mineral rights, which I slid across the wood until they stopped just short of Derek's hand. "This," I said, my voice steady as a blade, "is the truth. This cabin is mine. These accounts were Richard's and mine. And this land, with rights worth over $200,000, belongs to me. Not you, not the estate. Me." For a moment, the silence was so thick, it felt like the walls themselves were listening. Linda's eyes flickered as she scanned the papers, the mask of confidence she always wore beginning to crack. Derek shifted in his seat, his smirk faltering. I leaned forward, letting them see the fire in my eyes. "You thought grief made me blind. You thought my age made me weak. But I see everything clearly now, and I have already filed charges with the court. These documents are with my attorney, Mary Hannity. The sheriff has copies too. Even if you walk out of here right now, the law is already coming for you." Derek's face drained of color, his smooth composure slipping away. You filed charges?" His voice cracked on the last word, disbelief dripping from it. Linda's facade shattered further, her voice tinged with desperation. "Mom, please, you don't understand. We were trying to protect you. You've been lost since Dad died. You don't see how vulnerable you've been." "Protect me?" I snapped, my voice rising in a way that startled even me. "By stealing from me? By selling the home your father built with his own hands? By burying my memories in the dirt like garbage? That isn't protection, Linda. That is betrayal." Tears welled in her eyes, streaming down her face, but I did not relent. For months, I had been silenced by grief, but today I found my voice. "You call me incompetent. You call me emotional. But I am your mother, and I am not powerless. You wanted to erase me, but I am still here, and I will not disappear quietly." Derek slammed his fist against the table, the sound sharp as thunder. His mask of charm was gone, replaced by anger. "You won't win. We'll prove you're unfit. The court will see you're nothing but an old woman clinging to a house she can't maintain." I stood, gathering the papers back into my folder with deliberate calm. "Try," I said, "but the truth is already out there. The court will see what you've done. Everyone will." Linda sobbed openly now, her face buried in her hands, while Derek glared at me with the fury of a man whose empire of lies was crumbling. I looked at them both, sorrow and strength warring inside me. This was my daughter, the child I had once rocked to sleep, yet she sat before me as a stranger. Derek, the man she had chosen, had dragged her deeper into the darkness, but she had chosen to walk with him. For the first time in months, I felt taller, stronger, more alive. This was not just about documents or money. This was about dignity, about truth, about the legacy Richard had left me. I turned away from them, my decision unshakable. This conversation is over. The next time we speak, it will be in court. Behind me, Linda whispered through her tears, "Mom, please." But I did not look back. For the first time since Richard's death, I chose myself. The sound of Linda's sobs lingered in the kitchen long after I turned my back on her. I stood at the window, staring out at the lake, my breath fogging the glass. The surface of the water shimmered under the pale autumn sun, calm and unbroken, while inside this cabin a storm had just erupted. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel the ache of it, that this was my daughter, my only child, reduced to tears because she had chosen lies over love, greed over family. But even as my heart ached, my resolve remained unshaken. Some truths were too important to ignore. Some betrayals too deep to excuse. Behind me, Derek muttered curses under his breath as he gathered his briefcase. His mask of confidence was gone, replaced by the rigid stiffness of a man cornered. "This isn't over, Marjorie," he said finally, his voice low but laced with venom. "You think you've won, but we'll fight this. We'll drag you through court. We'll prove you're unstable. You won't last." I turned slowly to face him. My hands were steady, my voice calm, but my words cut sharper than any blade. "Do your worst, Derek. The truth is on my side. You've underestimated me for the last time." Linda lifted her face from her hands, her mascara streaked across her cheeks. "Mom, please," she whispered again, softer this time, less demanding, and more pleading. "You don't have to do this. We can fix it. We can make this right." But I shook my head. "No, Linda, you had so many chances to make it right. You chose this path, and now you will face what comes with it." The silence that followed was suffocating. Derek slammed his folder shut and stormed toward the door, muttering under his breath. Linda lingered a moment longer, her eyes searching mine for some trace of mercy, some hint that I might still bend. But I didn't. My heart ached with love for the child she had once been. But the woman before me was no longer that child. She had become something unrecognizable, and my love could not excuse her crimes. At last, she followed her husband out the door, their footsteps echoing against the gravel until they disappeared. I sank into a chair, my body trembling, the adrenaline draining away. For a long time, I sat in the silence of the kitchen, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the old clock on the wall. The confrontation was over, but the battle was not. They would try to fight back, try to twist the narrative, try to paint me as the villain. But the law was on my side now, and I had allies. For the first time since Richard's death, I felt not only alive but powerful. 2 days later, the sheriff arrived at the cabin. He was a broad-shouldered man with kind eyes. And when he handed me the official documents confirming the charges filed against Linda and Derek, I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and relief wash over me. The process would not be swift. There would be hearings, legal arguments, endless paperwork. But the wheels of justice had begun to turn. The news traveled quickly through the small town. Whispers followed me when I went into the grocery store, when I stopped by the post office. Some looked at me with pity, others with admiration. But I kept my head high. I was not ashamed. I was not a helpless old woman undone by grief. I was a survivor, a fighter, a mother who had chosen truth over silence. Linda tried to call me in the days that followed. The phone would ring, her name flashing across the screen, but I let it go unanswered. I could not bear to hear more lies, more pleas wrapped in manipulation. Derek sent me emails filled with legal jargon, threats disguised as negotiations, but I forwarded them all to Mary. Each time, she assured me, "You are doing the right thing. Hold firm." The night before the first court hearing, I sat by the fireplace, Richard's photograph in my hands. His eyes smiled at me from the frame, his presence as real as the crackle of the fire. "I'm doing this for us," I whispered, "for the life we built, for the promises we made, for the love that still lives here." In court the next morning, Linda and Derek sat at the opposite table, their faces drawn tight. Linda looked smaller somehow, her shoulders hunched, her eyes avoiding mine. Derek, though, still tried to wear his mask of arrogance, but it was cracking. The evidence Mary presented was overwhelming. The unauthorized mortgage, the drained accounts, the property listing, all backed by documents with their names and signatures. When the judge looked at me, his expression was one of quiet respect. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "the law is clear in this matter. You are the rightful owner of the property and assets in question. The actions taken by your daughter and son-in-law were unauthorized and constitute financial exploitation. This case will proceed to criminal charges." The words hit me with a weight that was both devastating and liberating. I had won, yes, but at a cost I could never have imagined. My daughter, my only child, would face jail time. And though part of me grieved that outcome, another part knew it was necessary. Real love, I realized, does not mean shielding someone from consequences. It means holding them accountable, even when it hurts. When the gavel struck, the sound echoed in my bones. Linda's face crumpled, tears streaming freely, while Derek's fury burned bright but impotent. I stood tall, my shoulders back, my eyes fixed forward. This was not the ending of a family, it was the beginning of justice. As I walked out of the courthouse, Olivia was waiting for me on the steps. She slipped her arm through mine, steadying me, grounding me. "You did it," she said softly. I nodded, my throat tight. "We did it," I corrected, and for the first time in months, I felt something new stirring in my chest. Not grief, not rage, but freedom. 6 weeks after the gavel fell in that courtroom, the cabin stood quiet again, wrapped in the deep stillness of early winter. Snow had begun to fall across the mountains, blanketing the trees in soft white and laying a gentle hush over the lake. The air outside was sharp and cold, but inside the cabin, a fire burned warmly in the hearth, crackling as though determined to remind me that warmth still existed in the world. Life had settled into a new rhythm, one I had not anticipated, but one that felt, strangely, like coming home to myself. I no longer woke each morning with the heavy dread of wondering what Linda and Derek were plotting, no longer lived with the fear that my home and memories could be stripped away in silence. The documents that once felt like fragile shields now rested safely in a locked drawer, their weight no longer a burden but a reassurance. I had survived the storm. One morning, as I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of tea, the mail arrived. Among the usual envelopes was one that made my breath catch. A letter from the county jail. My hands shook as I opened it, unfolding the lined paper to see Linda's handwriting. For a moment, I simply stared at it, the familiar loops and curves of her script carrying me back to a time when she had written me childish notes decorated with hearts. Then I began to read. "Dear Mom," it began. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I deserve to ask. But I want you to know that I'm sorry. Truly sorry. Derek convinced me that we were doing what was best. But the truth is, I let myself believe it because I wanted the money, the security, the power. I wanted control. And in reaching for it, I betrayed you. I betrayed Dad. I betrayed the very lessons you raised me with. Sitting here now, in this cell, I finally see what I've done, and I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself. I don't expect you to write back, but if you can, please know that I still love you." Tears blurred my vision as I read her words, the paper trembling in my hands. For weeks, I had wondered if she felt remorse, if the woman who once begged me to braid her hair before school still lived somewhere beneath the hardened lawyer's mask. And here, in black ink, was the proof. She was still my daughter. She had chosen wrong, terribly wrong, but she had not been swallowed whole. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in its envelope, my heart aching with a complicated mix of sorrow and relief. Forgiveness would not come easily, not after all that had happened. Trust, once broken, cannot be rebuilt overnight. But I realized then that forgiveness did not mean erasing what she had done. It meant choosing not to let her betrayal poison the rest of my life. It meant leaving the door cracked open, even just a little, for the possibility of redemption. The cabin itself seemed to mirror my healing. Where once it had felt like a prison of grief, its walls pressing in with memories too heavy to bear, now it felt expansive again, filled with possibility. I began to redecorate slowly, not to erase Richard's presence, but to blend it with my own renewed spirit. I hung new curtains in the living room, painted the kitchen cabinets a soft shade of blue, and planted evergreen wreaths on the porch. With each change, I felt as though I was weaving my own life back into the fabric Richard had begun. Olivia became a regular visitor, her laughter filling the rooms that had long stood silent. We shared meals, swapped stories, and sometimes simply sat in companionable silence by the fire. She told me about her late husband, about the loneliness she had carried for years, and I realized how much strength we both drew from one another. Our friendship became a balm, proof that companionship need not always be bound by blood. On Sundays, I began walking along the lake trail again, my boots crunching in the snow, the cold air burning my lungs in a way that made me feel alive. I carried Richard's memory with me, speaking to him silently as I walked, telling him of my victories, my fears, my gratitude. The grief was still there, but it no longer consumed me. It had softened into something I could carry without drowning. Sometimes at night I would sit by the window and look out at the oak tree where Richard's ashes rested. The branches were bare in the winter air, but I knew they would bloom again come spring. That thought comforted me. Life had seasons, some filled with loss, others with renewal. I had lived through both, and I knew I would continue to. What surprised me most was the sense of empowerment that grew inside me. I had faced betrayal from the very person I had once trusted most, yet I had not been defeated. I had found my voice, fought for my dignity, and reclaimed my life. The cabin was no longer a symbol of what I had lost. It had become a sanctuary of justice, a place where I had stood my ground and refused to be erased. In quiet moments, I imagined the future. Perhaps Linda would serve her time, learn her lessons, and one day return to me not as an adversary but as a daughter seeking a new beginning. Perhaps she would never come back at all. Either way, I knew I could live with it, because my worth no longer depended on her choices. My strength was my own. As the snow deepened outside and the fire crackled within, I realized that this was the resolution Richard would have wanted for me. Not a life without pain, but a life where I refused to surrender to it. A life where the cabin remained not a prison, but a testament to survival. As I sit here tonight, the fire glowing softly in the hearth and the snow falling quietly outside, I realize that this story was never just about property or money or even betrayal. It was about dignity. It was about remembering that love, real love, never manipulates and never demands silence. For a long time, I believed my grief made me powerless, that age had stolen my voice, that trust once broken could never be reclaimed. But I learned that even in the darkest chapters, strength can rise where you least expect it. I want to say this to anyone listening who has ever been made to feel small, invisible, or incapable simply because of age or vulnerability. Do not believe those lies. You are not defined by the people who betray you, nor by the voices that try to silence you. You are defined by the courage you choose, by the dignity you defend, and by the love you refuse to let die inside you. I will always be Linda's mother. That fact will never change, and my heart will always hold the ache of her choices. But being her mother does not mean surrendering my rights. It does not mean letting manipulation go unchecked. Sometimes, the most powerful act of love is drawing a line, saying, "This is wrong, and I will not allow it." That, too, is love. Love for yourself. Love for the life you built. Love for the truth. The cabin where I sit now is no longer a prison of grief. It is my sanctuary of justice, a place where I found not only healing but also a new kind of strength. And if I could do this, an aging widow with nothing but documents, memories, and resolve, then so can you. If this story speaks to you, if you have ever felt the sting of betrayal or the weight of being dismissed, I encourage you to share your story too. You are not alone. Together we remind the world that respect has no expiration date, that love without honesty is not love at all, and that justice, though sometimes delayed, can still be claimed. Thank you for listening to my journey. If you want to hear more stories like mine, stories of resilience, of pain and healing, of truth rising above betrayal, please subscribe to this channel, share this story, and walk with me as we continue to shine a light into the dark corners where silence once lived.